What makes something or someone memorable? Maybe I should tell you a bit of a story. So one of my really good friends showed up one day at my house and he said, I need to get into the world's most competitive medical school and my marks are really bad. Now, quite frankly, I wouldn't even let this guy debone a chicken breast, so he wasn't going to be a surgeon. But eventually he had tears in his eyes and he convinced me that this is what he was meant to do with his life. So I'm quite a resourceful guy, and I started putting my mind towards this concept and this idea of getting him accepted. And I created research folders on every single person on the admissions board. I found out everything about them. I knew what their hobbies were, when their birthdays were, how old they were, if they had any other interests, any non-profits or any sort of events that they contributed to. And then we started finding ways for Jared, my friend, to infiltrate their lives. So one of the guys played golf, so we had golf balls printed that said, "Have a great round," from Jared. And we found a way to sneak them into his golf bag. All of the single ladies on the admission board received Valentine's Day flowers and cards with love from Jared. People were sent books and notes, and every single time a handwritten note that said, "All the best, Jared." And all of these people had the same reaction. Who on earth is Jared? So our final masterpiece was a shoebox that had his application essay in it, and we sent it off to the head of the admissions board. And he was apparently quite an eccentric guy. And inside this shoebox, we had a plastic Ken Barbie doll. And we had cut away the chest and the stomach. And Jared had taken the time to create little pieces of plastic that resembled organs. And he put them in a little Ziploc bag with a challenge. Can you put Jared back together? So once they started reading his application essay, he started telling them about how, since he could remember, he told his parents he wanted to be a doctor. He wanted to do something meaningful in the world and help people. And if they noticed that the Ken Barbie doll was missing his heart, because his heart's already enrolled in medical school, and please could they let his body join it? So this head of the admissions board takes this shoebox with him to the final meeting, where every single person on that board, and he says, "There's this kid, he's a bit strange, his name is Jared." And everyone was like, "Jared! He's coming to our school!" And apparently everyone had tears in their eyes, and Jared's been a successful surgeon for 3 years now. So in my work in the last sort of decade, I've been really fascinated by this concept of what creates something memorable. What separates one idea, event, company, product from the rest? Why does something stand out? And it's actually quite simple. You can look at it on a scale. So for something to be really memorable, it needs to be intellectually confounding or challenging, right? And it also has to target your emotions on a very, very extreme level. So you need to feel something. You either need to feel happy or sad or surprised, some level of emotion. And the higher you can get something to register on that scale, the better. But it has to happen on both at the same time. Let me give you an example. Who remembers losing their virginity? Okay. So why? Why do you remember that? Well, you had this brand new, unique intellectual concept that got planted in your brain. You were never going to be the same again. And you also felt a lot of emotions. Maybe you were happy, maybe you were excited, maybe you were embarrassed, guys. But the reality is that it was a unique concept. Something was going to change in you as a person. So what my challenge is sort of saying, okay, well, where does this happen in other places in our lives? Who remembers 9/11? A unique concept. Someone took a plane and flew it into the side of a building in Manhattan. It was so unique and so astounding and so jarring intellectually that we even questioned whether what we were seeing was real. And that was before we started feeling extremely high emotions of anger, sadness, fear, depression. See, the reality is that for something to be truly memorable, it has to register on both these scales quite highly. Let me give you an example of why some things aren't memorable. Here's Wikipedia. I read something really interesting, but there's no emotional connection, so I forget it within a few days. Here's your SPCA commercial, or most nonprofits really. I feel just so hurt while I'm watching this ad. But once it's over, I move on with my life. So the secret is, can you get something to register on both scales at the same time as highly as possible? That's really going to create the difference between whether something is memorable or not memorable. So where else do we see this example? Because this happens all over the world, even in pop culture. So if we take a look at some of the highest grossing films over the last few decades, so in the 70s we had Jaws. Unique intellectual concept. Do you like swimming? There's a shark that hunts people. Okay? So there's also, during a movie, high stress, high anxiety, fear, triumph when they finally kill the bastard. So then we look at the 80s, the big highest grossing film in the 80s was E.T., unique intellectual concept. There are aliens, they come to Earth, there's one in the shed, don't worry, he's quite nice. And while this movie plays out, you're feeling various emotions. First you start with fear, then you start stressing, then you somehow develop empathy for this little thing, and then you go over to kindness and friendship. So always registering on high scales. In the 90s, the highest grossing movie was Titanic. And they borrowed a concept that's been used before, but was still quite effective. The hero and the heroine will not end up together. Borrowed from other memorable movies like Casablanca and Gone with the Wind. One of the things that really puzzled me in that movie was the fact that this old crazy lady threw this diamond off the back of the boat at the end of the film. So if we look at 2000, it was the movie Avatar. Again, aliens feature, unique intellectual concept, aliens exist. This time we go to their planet and mess it up. So then what about music? We already know that we feel something when we listen to music, but what about something being intellectually confounding in music, really? Well, let's look at the highest selling and most successful artists of each decade, based on album sales, concert tickets, as well as sort of chart toppers. In the 70s, we had Elton John, an openly gay man who sang music that even homophobic men sang to. In the 80s, we had Prince, the symbol, the man, the guy who wears makeup and marries beautiful women. Nothing weird or strange there for us. In the 90s, we had Madonna. Enough said. In 2000, we had, wait for it, a white rapper named after a candy by the name of Eminem. So every single time, really something unique. Now, where else does this happen? Where else do we see this? In society, in culture, in products, in companies. So Tom's shoes became really memorable when they told you that they were going to give a pair of shoes to someone in a third world country if you buy a pair. That's never been done before. It was really memorable. It sort of was covered in every single major media outlet. It was their marketing campaign. And you know what? The fact that there's a kid somewhere in a third world country wearing a pair of shoes thanks to you makes you feel good. Now, being memorable, it's an interesting thing because we always think it has to happen on this massively big, large scale. And the reality is that it doesn't. I mean, let's take a look at another company example before I tell you another story. So Red Bull launched one of the most successful marketing campaigns, arguably the most successful marketing campaign of all time, with Red Bull Stratus Project. This is where Felix Baumgartner jumped down from the edge of space, plunging to Earth at over 800 miles an hour, breaking through the sound barrier, something that had never been done before. This was live streamed by over 8 million people and had gone on to be viewed by more than 1 billion people since then. It was so intellectually confounding and challenging to us because this had never been done before. What was going to happen to this guy when he passed through the speed of sound? Even some of the scientists on the project were apprehensive about filming it because we didn't know what was going to happen to this guy. And when he started spinning out of control and they cut cameras away from the footage because they didn't want to show someone die on TV, a lot of people started feeling fear and sadness and anger. And when they finally cut back to him plunging to the ground, wearing his parachute, landing on the floor, raising his arms up high, you felt that emotion of triumph and happiness and just pure joy and elation at the fact that we had broken through on so many levels. You shared that moment with him. It was probably one of the most memorable things ever. So what if you're not going to start a multi-million-dollar company tomorrow? And what if you're not planning on plunging from space anytime soon? Can you still be memorable? Can you still have an impact? And this is a question that I had for a long time until one Tuesday morning in South Africa. I was living in Johannesburg, and I had a maid who came and cleaned my apartment once a week. And this morning, this Tuesday, she showed up with tears in her eyes. And frankly, you would too if you had to clean my apartment. So she showed up, and I said, Sylvia, what's wrong? Like, what's the problem here? You know? And she said, listen, Jacob died. And I realized I had no idea who Jacob was. So after a while, I'm asking her a few questions. It comes about that Jacob is actually her billy goat. You see, on the side, Sylvia had a little business. She was an entrepreneur. She had a goat breeding business on the outskirts of Johannesburg. So I said, don't worry, I can buy a goat. I can solve this problem for you. We'll just figure it out. So we went off into the outskirts of Johannesburg, and I was there in my business suit, in the dust, chasing goats, finding the right one. She was pointing at them, and so eventually we get this goat, and I pay for it, and we load it into my car. That's not a common occurrence. As much as you think this is Africa, like that doesn't happen a lot. Not a lot of people drive on the highway with a goat in the back seat of a BMW, okay? So we're driving down the highway, and there's this goat sticking its head out the side of the car. I have people like hooting and waving, like, there's a goat in your car. Like I didn't know. So we eventually dropped this goat off at Sylvia's place, and she gives me a big hug, and I felt really good about myself. I had a lot of pride, I had compassion, I had empathy. I felt like I'd made a difference. And then a few years later, I met Sylvia again, and she told me what I'd actually done. She had gone on to grow her little goat breeding business to the point where she was no longer cleaning apartments for people, to the point where she was supporting her entire family financially, to the point where she was putting 2 of her boys through university, a first for her community. And the reason that I'm telling you this story is that you don't need to be some massive corporation with millions of dollars to make a difference and be memorable. All you need to do is take an interest in the people around you. See, I've given you the roadmap, the intellectual idea of how to make something memorable, the concept, the academia of how to do it. The question is now whether you're going to take on that journey or whether you're going to choose to be memorable in someone else's life. Because I think that's how we can cure obesity. That's how we can revolutionize education. That's how we can change our world to become something better than what it is currently. And it's part of that idea of Joseph Campbell where he talked about the hero's journey, where each of us, in order to be significant, has to have an amazing purpose of something in life. And your amazing purpose could start at home. You could be an unbelievable, significant impact and memorable to your kids. So whatever you do, go out and be memorable.